long time ago, I had a brief spell in this group called the Traveling Wilburys. And we all used to sit around and write songs together. And this is one that was one of my favorite ones we came up with. And we're gonna try it for you now. One, two, one, two, three. Reputations changeable, situations time. I only you can. I'm so tired of being lonely. I still have some love for you. Won't you show me that you everybody's got somebody to blame. Oh.
Hi all, welcome to this part of a PPML of Contributor Talks. We have a very nice set of speakers ahead. So we're gonna begin with Mingshu, who's gonna tell us about a proof of compliance for anonymous unlinkable messages. So is it set to go?
Yeah, could you go to the first page? Okay, just on. Just go to the first page, and that's all.
Is it working?
Okay.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Please take it away now.
All right. Thanks for the introduction. It's really nice to meet everybody here. I'm Mingxin, a third-year PhD at CMU, and today I want to share our recent work, proof of compliance for anonymous unlinkable messages. And this is a joint work with my advisors, Elaine and Julia. And this is a pretty preliminary introduction to our work, so it's still an ongoing one. All right. So today we're going to talk about like privacy preserving machine learning and privacy preserving systems. But we all know that privacy preserving systems can be abused by malicious users, especially when the system provides anonymity to the user. For example, in federated learning, a malicious user can do a lot of things to attack the model. For example, it can bias the model outcome by maliciously generate some gradients, and even worse, it can also plant some backdoor in the federated learn model, and then like later use this backdoor to attack some system. And if you search for poisoning attack in federated learning on Google Scholar, you get like more than 20,000 papers on this. So this is definitely an issue. Moreover, beyond like machine learning, we have those kind of anonymous transaction systems. And in those systems, a criminal can can use it to do like money laundering, or even worse, it can sponsor like malicious entities. For those who don't know why I show Tornado here, Tornado is a coin mixing service on Ethereum. So basically, it provides you the way to anonymize your transactions, and it was recently sanctioned by the United States government for being allegedly exploited by North Korea hackers. So malicious user can definitely abuse these kind of systems. So the main problem here is that can we enforce some compliance check in privacy preserving systems? Here, I will give you some examples. For example, this is a pretty common anonymous voting setting. Here, let's assume there are multiple candidates, and each user can vote for 3 candidates. And here's the process. So every user, they first generate their 3 votes, and then they're going to send their votes to a shuffler or a mixer, whatever you call it. And then the shuffler is going to mix up all the votes. And then finally, the shuffler is going to send the shuffled votes to the server. And finally, the server is going to count on the shuffled vote set. And because all the votes are anonymized, the server basically only sees a histogram of all the votes, which is basically just the result. And here we want the rule of the client to follow is that every client, they can only vote for 3 candidates, and there should be no repetition. So they cannot vote for the same candidate. And in federated learning, there could also be example 2. For example, in this case, we are using something called a shuffle-based aggregation. So for example, let's say every client, they generate some gradients in their local computation. And then now the server wants to know the summation or the average of all the gradients. So what the client going to do is they first additively secret share or just additively split their gradient into multiple shares. And then they're going to send all the shares to the shuffler. And the shuffler, after the shuffler shuffle all the gradient shares, it's going to send all the shares to the server. And the server is simply just going to sums up all the gradient shares. And because all the shares are additively shared, so the final sum should just be the sum of all the gradients. And the rule here, because we want to restrict a contribution from a user, otherwise a malicious user can single-handedly bias the outcome by 1. So the rule we want to enforce here is that we want to enforce the L2 norm of the sum of the gradient shares is bounded by some predefined threshold L. And based on these 2 examples, we see that many compliance rules, they don't work on the individual share or individual message. They actually work on the union set of a user's input. And it gets trickier. So the main problem we try to address in our work is that can we have compliance check for the union of the user's input? And that gets trickier, especially in anonymous system, because if you do it naively, you could leak some linkability information to the server. So now let's get into our first attempt. So the most straightforward idea is to use non-interactive zero-knowledge proof or any like generic proof system. So basically, let's say we have n users, and each user has m inputs. And then it's pretty simply that every client, after they send their messages to the shuffler, they're going to additionally send another ZK proof just to prove that they're going to say, okay, my inputs satisfy the following properties. But there is a very obvious problem. That is consistency. So basically, the input used in the proof may completely differ from the original submission. So basically, a malicious user, it doesn't have to use the same set of messages as sent, because all the messages are anonymous. Even if it's swap out, like it completely use a different set of messages, it's not easily detected. So how to solve the consistency issue? There are multiple ways, like somebody already said, they can use like cryptography accumulators, but here we realize that a pretty classical polynomial set equality check is the most convenient one in here in this setting because it can be done in a distributed setting. And here's how it works. So first, every client, they're going to first commit to their inputs, and we assume the commit leaks no information. We assume the commitment leaks no information. They're first going to send the commitment to the server, and then the server is going to broadcast a challenge R to the client. And this challenge R is basically just a number. And then the client is going to generate a proof. Now the proof gets more complicated. It's not just that. So it contains three parts. The first part is that they need to prove their commitment is generated correctly. And secondly, based on the correct commitment, their input should satisfy the predefined rule. And thirdly, this is the polynomial check. So basically, they're going to compute the following polynomials, and which is, for example, suppose the first one, the first client has message x11 to x1m. It's going to compute the product of x11 minus r, x12 minus r until x1m minus r. It's going to compute this product, and it's going to review this product and in addition to the proof, and send these pair to the server. And how the server going to verify all the things? So first, the server is going to verify all the ZK proofs. So use the original ZK verifier. And then it's going to verify a very simple product, which is, because notice that the server can actually learn the whole shuffle set. So the server is simply going to compute the product of x1 minus r until xnm minus r. And we know that this thing is, so after permutation, this thing should remain the same because multiplication is, it can be permuted. And on the right-hand side, it's going to compute the product of all the row, which is like row 1 times row 2 times blah, blah, blah times row n. And if the set used by the client is consistent with the server's observable set, then this check should work with probability 1. But if the client secretly change one message or the set they use is inconsistent with the server set, then this test will fail with overwhelming probability due to the Schwarz-Zippel lemma. There's one last problem remain, that is privacy. So we actually recognize that if you reveal the role here directly, you're going to leak some extra information, just some intuition. For example, the server can brute forcefully trying to search like which subset correspond to can generate this role, and this is going to be a problem. So our final scheme, due to time limitation, I'm not going to cover details, but here's some intuition. So our final scheme is similar to the previous one, but now each user additionally adds 1 plus roughly like log size of the field divided by log number of honest clients. They're going to add these number of dummy messages. It's going to be pretty efficient. For example, if you have 1,000 honest clients and the field size is roughly like 2 to the 256, then you get like 51 dummies roughly. And they are going to add these number of dummy messages and re-randomize the poly evaluation result based on the dummies. And we can prove that it's actually private. And very interesting, the proof technique is inspired by shuffle DP aggregation and everything. So we did some pretty early stage experiments on this. And for example, we conducted 2 tasks here. For the first one, we conducted a robust summation task. So basically, we're using shuffle model to do summation. And then let's say we have 60 shares, and we write the circuit, and the constraint compiles to roughly like 20K constraints. And then each client takes like only 0.2 seconds to generate a proof. And the client communication is very efficient. It's only like 2.2 kilobytes. And the server time to verify those 1,000 clients only takes like 3.4 seconds. And in another application, we conducted a experiment on anti-money laundering. So basically here, we assume each client has 200 transactions. and we write some anti-money laundering rules in it, and it compiles to 1 million constraints, and each client takes 4 seconds to generate the proof, roughly, and then the client communication is roughly the same. It's 2.2 kilobytes, and the server time is roughly the same because verifying the proof takes the same time for different circuits. And the server time here takes 3.3 seconds. So the parameter is like we have 1,000 clients, less than 500 interruptions, and we're using Graph16 proof system. And yeah, that's it. So, this is still an ongoing work, and I'm really happy to share it here. And yeah, I'm happy to take questions.
Thank you so much. Are there any questions from the audience? Also, if there are questions from Zoom, please go ahead and type them in the chat, and I will read them out loud. If you have questions from the audience, you can come up to the microphone. So I would like to ask you a quick question in the meantime. Why did you choose Growth16 in particular? It sounds like you're optimizing for communication, but isn't this very expensive on the client side?
Right. So we are actually, so this is only one experiment. We also have the experiment using Plonk. So because we're using just a generic ZK library, and we basically like use all their options. And this is, Growth16 has the fastest like the proof generation time, and well in their library.
Okay.
So here we are showing like the fastest client time number, but in our well, okay, it's not like online yet, but in our final version of paper, we're going to show like different proof systems.
I would suspect Plonk to be faster in the client side, no?
Right. So it really depends on the implementation, I
Okay.
guess. Like for us, we prioritize the utility, so basically why we choose the GNARC library is that it provides a really like friendly API for writing like more complicated circuit. But I guess like for other proofs implementation, there could be different performance. But yeah,
Okay, that makes sense. Please.
I have a question about your dummies.
go ahead.
So just basic questions. If you're adding dummies, how are you going to make sure the correctness will hold?
Yeah, so basically what the server is going to do is, so when the client add their dummies, they're not going to add their ID in the dummy, but they're going to add a marker saying that, okay, this is actually a dummy. And then the server can actually remove the influence from of the dummy from the actual product.
But that still makes sure the proof
Yeah.
works.
So basically the dummy only needs to cover your personal product, but it doesn't have to. So basically how the dummy works is that it provides a way to cover your individual product, but it's not going to cover like the whole product.
Oh, okay. All right. Okay. Thank you.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. So let's thank the speaker again.
Thank you.
Now the next speaker sets up. Asra. So Castra sent the slides, but apparently maybe they're having some issues with them getting to the venue. So in that case, I suggest we move to the next talk, which will be Flamingo. Can Jiping come to the stage? Thank you. Excellent, thank you. So this talk is Flamingo, a multi-round single server secure aggregation with application to private variable learning. And Jiping Ma is going to give the talk. Thank you so much, Jiping. I think I need you on the microphone there.
It's stick here. So as you're probably aware, online services we use every day heavily rely on analyzing user data to provide better functionalities. Companies build prediction models for spam filters, tax predictions, shopping recommendations, and more. And in recent years, machine learning becomes especially popular for building prediction models. For example, Gmail uses machine learning powered by user feedback to better detect spams. So traditionally, a company which is abstracted as a central server here will just collect data from user devices and train a model based on the collected data. And then the model is deployed in everyone's app for services. But here you can easily observe an issue that everyone sends their personal data to the central server, and this data may contain much sensitive information that we don't want to share with anyone. So to mitigate the privacy concerns, McMahon et al. Proposed a notion called federated learning, where many users can collaboratively train a model without directly handing their data to the central server. Mariana has talked about this before, but now I'm gonna describe it in a conceptually simple way. So the decentralized training works in 3 steps. First, a central server, the clients will run a model update algorithm on its local data and get a local model, which is called local weights. You can simply think of these weights as long vectors of length 10K or more. And then the client will send these vectors to the server in the clear. Next, the server simply adds them up and averages them to get a global model, or so-called global weights. So what I just described here is one iteration in the training. In a full training session, such summation procedure needs to run many, many times on randomly selected clients from the whole population until the model converges. Okay, so this is a very, very elegant idea, but this doesn't completely solve the problem. The issue is that observing each individual weight actually can infer information. So actually some researchers later on show that we can do some reverse engineering on these individual weights and actually recover the personal data. But if we just look again at the 3 steps, what we need here is not the individual weights. What the server needs is only the summation of them. So this naturally inspires us to use secure aggregation to perform the summation in a private way. Crucially, such a protocol will allow the server to compute a sum of inputs from clients without learning anything beyond the sum and what is implied by the sum. So for example, in the federated learning case, these inputs of the clients will be the model weights, which are the vectors, and the server output will be the sum of those vectors, which is the global model I just showed before. So secure aggregation is a well-studied problem in cryptography community, actually. So there are many, many works designed protocols under different communication models, under different assumptions, and etc. But applying them in a black box way in a federated learning setting is not ideal. So I'll talk about the reason next. But just to clarify in this talk, I will focus on concrete efficiency instead of asymptotics. The reason is that those secure aggregation protocols has very similar asymptotics, but based on their concrete design, the concrete cost will differ very, very much. Okay, so the constraints in federated learning can be split into 2 parts. Basically, the first one is on the federation side, the second one is on the machine learning side. So on the federation side, different from the centralized training, the clients now become the participants of the computation, and they are very restricted because they are mobile devices. So they have limited computation power. They're also very unstable, meaning that they may get disconnected to the network at any point during the protocol execution. So a desired protocol should have lightweight client computation, and also it should tolerate dropouts, meaning that if some clients quit in the middle of the computation, the server eventually can output the sum of inputs from those clients that stays online. The machine learning side also makes the protocol design challenging. So the key reason is that all the parameters here are large. Just to give you an idea, the inputs, which are the local weights, are 500,000 for popular models for standard image data sets. And also each iteration of the training, a few hundreds to a few thousands clients are selected. And also such summation needs to run for a few hundred times until the model converges. So here what we want to get is some reasonable efficiency for the training. So we want to let the training to finish as quick as possible, despite these parameters are large. So there are some works, which also included in some previous talk, that design protocols works well for restricted clients and also can compute a single sum pretty efficiently. But the problem is that people have overlooked one dimension of the efficiency matrix, which is here. So the protocol has to run for many, many iterations on different sets of clients repeatedly. And the issue in this previous protocol is that they have multiple round trips, which included some sort of setup, which is very, very expensive to run, and some may even require specific assumptions on the adversary model, which is very hard to assume in the practice. So our goal is to push secure aggregation to efficiently run for entire training. At the meantime, we also improve the efficiency for each single sum. And we achieve this goal by reducing the number of round trips for overall training time. Before I dive into our protocol details, I want to first highlight why reducing the number of round trips is doubly important in federated learning. So here, secure aggregation requires interactions between server and clients. And if a server waits for clients for a fixed amount of time and the client does not respond, the server will continue and drop it. So this means that one more round trip could result in more dropout devices. So reducing the number of round trips will actually reduce the bias towards the stable and powerful devices and also improve the quality of the trained model. The second reason is more straightforward. It reduces runtime. But later in the evaluation section, I will show you why this really matters in terms of concrete overall training time. So we propose a protocol that fits these efficiency needs and can practically run for a full training session for a standard image data set. And we have the same threat model as in previous work, which is a malicious adversary controlling the server and a subset of clients. In this talk, for simplicity, I will only cover the semi-honest case. For malicious case, I'm happy to talk about it offline. Okay, so our protocol is based on two key ideas. The first one is a fault-tolerant sum protocol, which uses two building blocks, very simple. One is the pairwise canceling tricks used in DCNet, and the second one is threshold decryption. And then we're able to extend this protocol to efficiently compute many sums. Actually, the two key ideas are not independent. As you will see later, the design of this fault-tolerant protocol will allow us to do a simple modification to reuse the secrets. So to start with, let's say we have three clients, Alice, Bob, and Charlie. They each hold a long vector, x1, x2, x3. The server wants to compute the sum. The first step, which we call the setup phase, is to establish pairwise secrets between them. So in previous work, this is either done by setting up a PKI or a few interactions between the server and clients. So this is the relatively expensive part. But once this is done, each client only does a very cheap operation. So they use the short secret to mask the long vector by stretching the secret using a pseudonym generator. And the masking is done in a special way such that when all these masks add together, they will cancel each other out. So what the server do here is to ask all the clients send the vectors v1, v2, and v3, and simply add them up. This will give us the sum of x's. So the simple design already have efficient client-side computation, despite the inputs are large. However, as you will see, if Charlie went offline when the server asked to send v3, the server will only get two vectors, v1 and v2, but adding them together will not give us anything useful. The reason is that only the masks are associated with Charlie are canceling each other out, but the masks, the masks are associated with S12 are canceling each other out, but the masks associated with Charlie are still there. So the trick is to reveal the secrets associated with Charlie, and this is still private for the instance I gave here because X1 and X2 are still masked by some other masks. But of course, revealing secrets will result in more issues, and we have more techniques of additional masks to deal with it, but let's stick to this example for now. So our technique is to have each client append a public key encryption of the short secret to the vector and submit them together to the server. So assume there's a system-wide public key, and then we'll later discuss about this associated secret key. So now the server will get the vector and two ciphertexts. To recover the secrets associated with Charlie, the server will need to have some way to decrypt it. So we introduce a notion of decryptors here, where these decryptors are chosen randomly from the whole population. We have some protocols to discuss how you choose these decryptors and how you share the secret key here. But this is orthogonal to the summation protocol, so I will not talk about it here. The server next will simply ask the decryptors to decrypt the ciphertext and get S13 here. And this is also very lightweight because the server only needs to ask for the masks between the online clients and offline clients. And also these secrets are very, very short compared to the vectors. I think the clicker doesn't work.
You put next slide on there.
Again? Okay, good. Okay, so in a similar way, the server can also recover S23, and now it subtract the mask from the vectors, and then they will give the servers X1 plus X2. Okay, so now we have a fault tolerant sum protocol, which is great. This is 2 round trips between the server and clients. First, the server collect vectors from the clients, and then the server asks decryptors for recovery. But if we just trivially repeat this protocol, this is not secure because these masks, or like pairwise seeds, are essentially one-time paths, so you cannot reuse them. The trick here is very, very simple. It's incredibly simple that you just need to apply a peer F on the secret S12 and generate an iteration-specific secret, which is this one. So now you can view this pairwise secrets as a long-term secrets, and every time in the iteration, you use the iteration-specific secrets. So this idea, it looks simple, but it's not compatible with some previous work due to the crucial difference design in the fault tolerance. Okay, just to summarize here, so now we have a way to do the costly setup once, and then we can run the protocol many, many times. There are also some other additional details in the paper. For example, how we share the secret key among decryptors, how we can transfer the secret key from one set of decryptors to another set of decryptors, how we achieve malicious security, and how we do all kinds of system level implementation to efficiently instantiate these crypto primitives. Just to clarify, so here we have 2 round trip for the semi-honest case, but for the malicious case, we only have 1 additional round trip. So we have 3 round trips overall. Okay, so finally, I will talk about the evaluation results. So here we have many, many efficiency metrics to look at. But what really matters depends on what we want to optimize. So in a machine learning setting, what we want to optimize is the overall training time. So the server wants to get a model as quick as possible while including as many clients as possible. So previously, the server computation was a bottleneck. When the first paper in 2007 in this area came out, the server computation would dominate all the costs. But later on, there are many, many other papers improved the server computation cost. So now it's not a bottleneck anymore. So when server computation is made cheap, what actually matters is the run complexity. To see the reason, let's look at how the server and the client interact in the protocol. So the server will first contact the set of clients and ask them to send messages. Then it waits for a fixed amount of time until it receives a desired fraction of messages, say from 99% of clients. Then the server decided to proceed. Okay, so this is one round trip in the protocol. The server will contact the set of clients again and then start the next round trip. So because the time to process the messages, namely the server computation is made quite small, what actually matters is the waiting time. So that's why round trip really matters here. So here I show you a figure of running an entire training on Cypher 100 using the best of prior work, a non-private baseline, and our work. So we simulate all the message delays and also the server and client interaction using a multi-agent messaging system. The blue lines here is a previous work from Google. This takes 6 round trips. Each round trips, the server needs to interact with all the clients. And the green lines is the baseline, which is non-private, so the server just asks the client to send the weights in the clear. And the orange line is our work, which takes 3 round trips in the malicious case, but only 1 round trip, the server interacts with all the clients, and the rest of them, the server only interact with the decryptors. Okay, so this summarizes my talk, and there are also many, many interesting directions to explore, and I'm happy to talk about them offline. This is our paper and code. They're all available online. Thanks. I'm happy to take any questions.
Personally, I think we are a bit short on time, so there's just one quick question. Maybe we can take that one. Okay, so in that case, please, the next speaker comes up, and then let's take the speaker in. One moment.
Okay.
So can you check that the clicker works just to make sure? It does? Okay, great. So the next speaker is Xinhao Xu, who is going to tell us about practical lattice-based private stream aggregation and application to federated learning. Thank you so much.
Hi, I'm Jin Young from Seoul National University. I'm going to talk practical lattice-based private stream aggregation. This is a joint work with my advisor Yongsu and people at Desire Company. So let me give a brief review on private stream aggregation scheme. PSA scheme is a simple MPC protocol that processes time series data. Its output is just sum of all participants' input. It is very efficient in that it just takes 1 round communication per each time unit. It has a wide range of applications from smart metering to federated running on private data. in PSA schemes, we usually consider there is no dropout or no malicious adversaries. So PSA protocol is usually consists of users and aggregator, where users provide inputs. At the beginning of the protocol, a setup authority runs a setup algorithm to distribute secret keys to users. Then users use encryption algorithm to encrypt their data at each time unit and sends ciphertext to an aggregator. Upon receiving all the ciphertext from users, aggregator run aggregation algorithm on all the upon all users ciphertext. The security of a private stream aggregation often referred as aggregator obliviousness. Its idea is that an aggregator learns nothing but an output, even if it colludes with some users. So it is usually defined over this game. At the compromise phase, an adversary gets secret keys of his colluded parties. Then at the query phase, an adversary can query any ciphertext for users, honest users. And at the challenge phase, an adversary is asked to distinguish ciphertext from honest user of his chosen inputs. A PSA protocol is said to be secure if the winning advantage of winning this game is negligible. From the seminar work by Shi et al., there has been various PSA schemes. For the classic security, there have been various PSA schemes based on DDH or DCR or discrete log assumptions. For the post-quantum security, R-based construction is popularly deployed, such as backup or. However, there is a common issues on PSA schemes in that if there is a one-milestone corruption, the rest of input is already revealed by this formula. Also, there is a leakage on there can be a privacy leakage from output, so differential privacy technique is often incorporated to overcome this problem. In this work, we build an efficient PSA scheme based on hint MLW assumptions. Hint MLW assumption is a variant of MLW, which is at least hard as standard MLW problem, which we prove in our recent paper. Also, our protocol provides enhanced security notion that we consider simulation-based security instead of game-based AO. Also, our PSA scheme provides efficiency in computation and communication. For communication efficiency, it has very small expansion rate, which is about 1.6 times in our implementation. For computational efficiency, encryption and aggregation for a single integer only takes few microseconds. In addition, our PSA scheme also provides flexibility in users' input dimension. So user can choose input dimension from 1 to 10 on demand. Then the communication cost varies linearly on input dimension. So we now see a simulation-based security version of our PSA scheme. We say that PSA protocol is secure if it is secure against passive adversary, which is a user MPC protocol security definition. In other words, there is an efficient simulator for real transcript, which consists of user's ciphertext and output. Now we explain our PSA schemes. For notation, we denote ciphertext modulus as Q and plaintext modulus as P. And we denote delta scaling factor delta as Q over P. At the setup phase, setup authority runs the following functionality called zero share. It is a simple functionality that just picks random ciphers whose input is 0 and distributes secret key to each users. We note that this can be implemented without trusted setup since it just using MPC protocol since it just pick random samples. It also says LW randomness through A1 to AT for each timestamp. And this can also be implemented using PRF. For encryption, you use usual BFV encryption as follows, using the common random string or LW randomness AT. And it just output BI part since A part is common across all the users. For aggregation, we just sum out all the BIs and scale it by delta inverse. For the correctness, if we sum all the BIs, we have the following, since sum of SI is equal to 0. Then if we round it by delta inverse, we get YT, which is the sum of all the users' input, since error term EIs are usually small. For the security, we only consider the number of honest users are, there is a adversary n-2 n-2, since n-1 case is inevitable for leakage. So when there is n-2 corruption, the problem boils down to simulate the following sample, since an adversary knows S plus S prime. So if you see the first two components, it is exactly at every sample. So we may want to simulate it by as follows, by replacing second term as a uniform random sample. But it is not so straightforward since the last term contains partial information on LW error part. So to prove the security of our PSA scheme, we use the following argument, which is proven in our recent paper. It essentially says that distinguish two samples is at least hard as LW problem. The high-level idea of this argument is that if we analyze the conditional distribution of E given E plus E prime, it still follows discrete Gaussian with reduced variance. So we can construct an efficient reduction to LW problem. For details, you can check in our talk in Wednesday. For smaller case, we can extend our proof to using hybrid argument. In conclusion, our PSA scheme is secure in zero-share hybrid model and LW assumptions against passive adversaries. To check performance of our PSA scheme, we implement it in proof of concept level. We set upper bound for users at 2 to the 10, and we set Q to the ciphertext modulus Q to the 2 to the 32, so that the modular operation over Q can be efficiently supported by int32 operations. As a result, our parameter provides expansion ratio which is above 1.6, which is very small. For the computational efficiency, we measure the performance of encryption and aggregation algorithm. And we see that it just takes few microseconds for single integers. We exclude the sampling time for CRS AT since it can be pre-computed or its time is highly depends on which PRF is used. For batched input, we can use RW encryption for further enhancement. Thank you. This is end. If you have any question, feel free to ask.
Thank you. We have plenty of time for questions if there is any. Just come to the front if you have any questions, also in the chat and soon. In the meantime, I do have maybe one or two questions. So one I want to ask is, what is so special about LWE in this construction? What is so special about LWE? Can you abstract away the type of primitive you need to instantiate it from other assumptions, perhaps? Yeah, what is the exact property of LWE you're using? Like, is it homomorphism? Is it something related to? Can you reply from the microphone, please, for the recording?
We use LW, we built our PSA scheme on LW assumptions to utilize key and message homomorphism. So we utilize the sum of SIs are equal to 0, which provides efficiency in aggregation algorithms.
Can you replace this with Palier or something similar? Okay. Is there any other question from the audience? In that case, I would like to thank the speaker again.
Thank you.
Can you check the clicker, please? It's working? Okay, good. Thank you. So the next talk is abounding the accuracy loss for graphical models based graphical model based synthetic data generation in privacy preserving machine learning. And Mingyu Liang is going to give the talk. Thank you very much.
Thank you for the introduction. Hi, everyone. I'm Mingyu Liang. I'm very happy to be here. Today, I would like to present our paper, and this is a joint work with Yvonne, Evan, Dana, Daniel, Antigone, and Ming. So first, let's quickly recap the definition for differential privacy again. We say that two dataset D and D pi are labeling if they differ in a single individual's record. And the function f is differentially private if for any labeling database D and D pi, the output distribution of FD and FD pi are close. And one generic way to achieve differential privacy is through using Gaussian mechanism by adding Gaussian noise to perturb the output. Finally, one last property of differential privacy is post-processing, which means that once the function is already differentially private, then whatever computation you perform on its output will not further degrade its privacy guarantee. So one of the very classical model to generate synthetic data is what we call select, measure, and generate paradigms. And the private probability graph model is one of the schemes that fall into this paradigm. So in this paradigm, the first step is to select a list of queries or marginal, where each marginal contains a subset of attribute. For example, it can be the subset of gender and race, or gender and income greater than 50K. The second step is measured, which takes every marginal you select in your list, and you count the occurrence of samples with for each combination of possible values that can be taken by this marginal. For example, for gender and race, if you assume both of them only take binary value, you illuminate all the possible combinations 0, 0, 0, 1, 1, 0, and 1, 1, and you count the number of samples that fall into each category. And finally, you add Gaussian noise to perturb the output. So at this point, if you just release the noisy marginal, you already achieve differential privacy. In the first step, you will actually generate the synthetic data using just the noisy marginal you generate. Due to post-processing, your synthetic data will preserve the same privacy guarantee. So roughly the idea of this select, measure, and generate paradigm is that the select marginal of the synthetic data roughly equal to the select marginal of the real data. Okay. So there are also other existing differential private machine learning approach. One of the most prominent one is the differential private stochastic gradient descent, which involve the training party adding DP noise at each iteration of gradient computation. Another line of work is called private aggregation of teacher ensemble. Again, the training party is going to take the sensitive data to train an aggregate teacher model and use it to give noisy predictions to train a student model. So in both of these cases, the noise is added during or after the training, so you need to rely on the trust assumption of the training party. So compared to DPSGE and PAID, the benefit of using DP synthetic data is that it does not rely on the trust assumption of the training party, so that once you generate a DP synthetic data, you can potentially distribute it and it can be potentially be reused without worrying about the composition or degrading of the privacy. In the past, this DP synthetic data generated from the select, measure, generate, Paradise has been previously studied to show to perform very well in the context of measure statistics. So our question is, what accuracy guarantee we can get when we use the DB synthetic data for training purpose? Okay. So here is an overview of our results. We consider the most iconic machine learning task, logistic regression, and our co-technique is polynomial approximations of the sigma function, which roughly allow us to use an approximate loss function, which can be expressed as a degree for the multivariate polynomial, and can be written as a linear function with respect to all the four-way marginal. And by four-way marginal, I mean all the marginal that contain exactly the four attributes. Okay. So our theorem one informally is that if all the four-way marginals of the synthetic data exactly equal all the four-way marginals of the real data, then training on the synthetic data and training on the real data using this approximate loss function will give you the exact same output model. And our theorem two says that if all the four-way marginal of the synthetic data roughly equal to all the four-way marginal of the real data, then the loss difference between the model you train from synthetic data and the model you train from the real data is small. Okay, we will go into detail. So first, let's quickly recap logistic regression. In logistic regression, your eventual goal is to find the optimal weight vector of size m, where m is the number of attributes. And to make a prediction, what you do is you can first compute the inner product of the weight vector and the attribute vector, plus some threshold value b to get the z, and then you apply the sigma function to get the prediction label y hat. And the loss function can be defined as the cross entropy loss, and the gradient can be defined accordingly. So recall that our core technique is the polynomial approximation for this sigma function. In particular, we use this degree 3 minimax polynomial approximation that closely approximate the sigma function within the interval of -5 and 5. And this polynomial has been used in the past, mostly in the context of FHE, to minimize the depth of multiplication circuit. So here we're using this approximate polynomial so that we can get an approximate gradient function by simply replacing the y hat with the y hat pi. Okay. So now we are ready to revisit our theorem one again. Our theorem one says that if the dr the real data set and ds the synthetic data set, if the synthetic data set preserve all the four-way marginals of dr, then we can say that the approximate gradients of the real data set on any single point is exactly equal to the approximate gradient of the synthetic data set on the same point. Right. And again, this is because we can simply express this trend into a linear function of all the four-way marginals. And what this means is that eventually when you are training using synthetic data and real data using this approximate loss function, you will get exactly the same model because at each step you have the exact same gradient. So of course, it's not very realistic to assume that the synthetic data can perfectly preserve all the four-way marginal due to the use of Gaussian noise. So for our theorem 2, we consider they are only approximately equal. And also we would like to see how using this synthetic data compare with the original training using the original loss function rather than just the approximate loss function. So here we define these two optimal weight that we want to compare. WR is the minimum weight for the original loss function training on the original real data. And WS is the minimum weight for the approximate loss function training on the synthetic data. And additionally, we made the assumption which basically says that for all the data set for all the data sample in your real and synthetic data set, the inner product between its attribute and your optimal weight is bounded by 4.05. So we leave this assumption because the approximate loss function is convex only within this interval. And this is a reasonable assumption when because when you are training, you always use the regularized return to penalize a weight that's too large. Okay. So given this assumption, we can make a claim for our theorem two, which basically saying that the loss of the model you get from your synthetic data minus the loss you get from the real data, the difference can be bounded by a small constant of 0.06 plus an asymptotic term that tends to 0 as the n goes to infinity. So n here is the size of data set. So roughly the 0.06 comes from the error of the polynomial approximation, and the asymptotic term comes from the use of Gaussian noise to achieve dp. So we have also conduct experiment to show that this synthetic data can in fact quite that the performance can quite approach the real data set. So we use the adult data set and compact data set and generating synthetic data by picking some subset of three-way and two-way attributes. And we run the multiple experiments with different choice of privacy budget epsilon. And we compare the F1 score with regard to the classification label 0, F1 score with regard to the label 1, and also the accuracy. So the story here is basically as we increase the privacy budget, you can see the performance for the synthetic data approach the real data set very fast. Okay, so here are some other graphs for the same experiment where we focus on measuring the difference of loss for the these two data set. Again, the same story here. It's as we increase the privacy budget, the loss difference of the training results are very close. Okay, so in conclusion, we show that theoretically, the loss of synthetic model differ from the real model by a small constant plus a function that tends to 0 as the training set size increase. Experimentally, we show that the loss of synthetic model increased by less than 0.03 and the accuracy dropped by less than 2% when we choose the privacy budget epsilon equal to 1 for both the adult and compact data set. For the future world, we considered exploring the accuracy loss for other downstream machine learning models, such as decision tree, K-linearity labeled, and neural networks. And that's all. I'm happy to take any question, and you can also find our paper there. Thank you.
Is there any quick question where the next speaker sits up, please? If you have any question, please come to the mic. No question?
So for your algorithm, it seems like the final model only depends on the first order marginals and not the data themselves. Is that correct?
So you mean the synthetic data depending on the marginals, not
when
the...
you finish training, does it only depend on all the four different combinations of first order marginals?
Well, I get...
Does it depend on the data?
Yeah, so for privacy purpose, it's technically speaking, yeah, it does only depends on the four-way marginal because that's where you get the privacy guarantee. So at that point, you don't have any access to the original data set.
Right, but do you have to even generate the synthetic data given you know all the marginals that are privatized?
Right. Yeah. So we want to try to make this synthetic data like can be generic to apply to many tasks. So so that's why we generate synthetic data that can be potentially used. And also for the downstream tasks, they don't need to like redesign their algorithm.
I understand the motivation. I'm just checking.
Right.
You could have skipped the synthetic data part and just solved it using marginals, right?
That will require the training the machine learning algorithm. Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, so please let's thank the speaker again. So we go back to early in the schedule. And now we're gonna hear about the scalable, incrementally verifiable computation with applications to zero knowledge proof of learning. And Kasra Abazadeh is gonna give us a talk. Thank you so much.
First, sorry about the missing the schedule. I was working around the schedule. I will try to keep it short to catch.
The clicker is not working.
Working.
You guys make sure it's focused. Yeah, there you go.
For machine learning systems, there are lots of integrity and confidentiality problems. For example, once a machine learning model is developed, the company needs to keep and preserve the intellectual property. We need to check that the computation results are valid and based on a committed model. We need experiment results to be reproducible, and maybe in the training, someone has imposed some blind black doors in the machine learning system, and we want to prevent that. Let's look at the life cycle of machine learning models. First, we collect enough data samples, and then we apply some learning algorithms, and finally, we use the prediction of the model. For each of the phases, we can define different integrity issues. For example, in data collection, is the data set well formed or not? For predictions, are predictions consistent with the committed model or not? But here we focus on the training phase of and learning algorithms of the machine learning model. This can have many applications, and here we just discuss two of them. First is the model ownership problem. Suppose that a developer of a model have provided the model to a cloud service, and the cloud service can use the model and use its parameters without preserving the intellectual property. So the models can be stolen, and the solutions in the ML literature mainly are watermarking schemes, which they have security and utility trade-offs and can be removed by the adversary. Here, someone can ask the claimer to approve that you have trained your model on your own. Also, in the delegated training, for example, in the distributed training where there are multiple servers training a model, some parties can be malicious, and we want to check that all results returned by the workers are correct. And the solutions for in the distributed setting for presenting resilient aggregation, the problem with these solutions is that the effectiveness only depends on the fraction of corrupted parties. So we can ask the workers to prove that you have trained your model correctly. For training, in this work, we just focus on deep neural networks. We first sample some random initial weights, and we divide data set into multiple batches, and in each steps, this is iterative computation, and in each iteration, we using a batch of data samples, we update the models and optimize model parameters with respect to the batch. And the only existing work is based on re-execution, where the prover reveals some intermediate models and data samples at periodic checkpoints, and the verifier just re-execute the updates to check that if they're correct or not. But unfortunately, there is a lack of rigorous security. This is not a cryptographic work, and there recently someone have found practical concrete attacks, and there is no privacy. The verifier should receive data samples and model parameters in plain, and proof size is very large. For example, for validating 1,000 iterations of a model with 4 million parameters, the proof size would be something about 500 gigabytes. A natural alternative is zero-knowledge proofs, especially SNARKs, where there's a prover and a verifier, and there's a circuit with some public input and output and a private instance. The server returns to the computation and returns a proof, and the verifier can check that if the proof is correct or not. And I'm just skipping these properties and go to the main part. Okay. The problem with generic zero-knowledge proof systems is that if we put all these updates into one circuit, the prover memory overhead grows linearly with the size of the circuit, so with the number of the iterations. And training even a tiny model such as LeanIt with 60K parameters with batch size 128 would have, for 10K iterations, would have something about 15 trillion gates. But in the practice, the largest circuit that a monolithic snark has been applied to, it contains just 1 billion gates. And also it doesn't allow incremental training. And if we just continue the updating the model parameters, we need to redefine the circuit and generate the proof from scratch. So instead, we focus on another approach, incrementally verifiable computation, where at each iteration, at ICE iteration, the prover generates the proof for a circuit that first executes the ICE step of the iteration circuit and also executes some snark verifier to validate the correctness of PI-1 and generate a proof PI for this augmented circuit CA. And PK recursively proves the correctness of all iterations from 1 to k, and this is possible because of if the proof size and the verifier time of the executive snark is succinct and polylogarithmic in the size of the circuit. And prover memory proof size and verifier time here is only proportional to the size of augmented circuit, to 1 iteration, and independent of the number of iterations. But the problem with existing incrementally verifiable computation schemes is that the proof size and prover time and prover memory overheads are not scalable to proof of learning application. For example, we can run just a state-of-art IVC with 256 gigabytes RAM for circuits with size at most 10 million gates at the prover cost of 1 microseconds per gate. So, but for example, for a tiny model like LeanIt with batch size 128, each gradient circuit iteration just contains 1.5 billion gates. So the question is that can we design scalable IVC schemes to support these DNN's gradient descent computation? We do that in 2 steps. First, designing a proof system for gradient descent computation, and then make the snark verifier succinct and to reduce the recursion overhead. For the first part, we design a proof system for gradient descent based on the GKR protocol, because the GKR protocol has asymptotically optimal prover overhead, which is linear in the size of the circuit and the size of the I/O, and concretely very efficient. And the main point is that the soundcheck protocol that is used in the GKR protocol can be optimized for matrix operations such as convolutional and matrix multiplication to have sublinear overhead, which is the main bottleneck of the gradient descent computation. So I skip these the details. Okay, the other step is to making the verifier parts of this augmented circuit succinct. The point is that the GKR-based proofs have relatively large verifier overhead. And this is because first, the verifier needs to evaluate or check the evaluation proof of several multilinear polynomials, which includes the multilinear extension of the input and output of the circuit, and also multilinear extension of variant predicates. And also the if D is the depth of the circuit C, we have D point D.log C Fiat Shamir hash evaluations that should be performed by the verifier, and these number of the evaluations is expensive to be proved. For the second problem, we design a customized soundcheck protocol for a specific hash function we use, mimic hash function. And for the first problem, instead of evaluating the polynomial evaluations or delegating this to the prover and checking the evaluation proofs, we just aggregate the evaluations. So the prover do the evaluations and send evaluations without evaluation proofs to the verifier circuit, and the verifier circuit just aggregate the evaluations. These aggregation schemes was studied in previous works, but the problem is that the prior work only targets univariate polynomials, and the generalizations to multivariate polynomials impose quasi-linear cryptographic operations on the prover side. But instead, we use a simple aggregation scheme with linear scalar operations. I'm skipping these technical details of the aggregation. Okay. Finally, putting everything together, we first formally defined the notation of zero knowledge proof of learning, and we suggested a concrete construction and instantiations of the zero knowledge proof of learning. And at the end, the server training the model sends the verifier the commitment to the data set, a commitment to the initial weights and the final weights with the 6 proofs, which the proof size and the verifier time is independent of the number of iterations, and the verifier can check that if the whole training process was correct or not. And for performance, for example, suppose that we have a turn-acted version of VGG11 with 4 million parameters and batch size 8. The circuit size for each iteration of this model is about 20 billion gates, which is 200 times larger than prior art limitation. And we just estimated the prior work performance based on their per gate performance. And here, the fractal suggests the best verifier time, but the prover time is impractical. Halo suggests the best proof size. For prover time and proof size, they bigger first than prior work. But for the prover time, we are 14 times better than the prior art. And these are all generic IVC schemes. And this is at the cost of 0.08 microseconds per gate. And maybe this value is not still practical for industrial applications, but we believe that the direction we initiated in this work will lead to practical constructions in the future. And the other important point is that we measured the end-to-end prover performance for the training of, again, linear with 60K parameters on the minus data set for one epoch, for one pass over the whole data set. And for the prover memory overhead, this is an order of magnitude better than the prior art. This is the NOVA. And the batch size limitation for NOVA is 8. More than that, we cannot run because of the lack of the memory. This is for 256 gigabytes RAM. And for the prover runtime, the point is that for NOVA and other prior work, the computation cost for the prover grows at least linearly with the batch size. So by making the batch size bigger, at least there wouldn't be any effect on the end-to-end runtime. But for us, because of using sublinear prover sum check protocols, with growing the batch size, the end-to-end time would be less. And thank you.
So for this talk, please let's take the questions offline, and then the next speaker comes in line, please. Thank you.
So I'll be talking about private time series queries from function secret sharing with applications to machine learning. And this is joint work with Mayank, Raluca, and Jan at UC Berkeley, and appeared at Oakland.
And this is Emma.
Thanks. So there's a growing trend of relying on cloud databases to store and query time series data. And applications of this include smart homes, industrial IoT, and remote patient monitoring. One challenge with all these applications is that the data is often sensitive. And so there we go. And so there's a danger of server compromise. So let's take remote patient monitoring as an example. So we have a patient and they're regularly uploading values to some database. Maybe we don't have just one patient, but many patients. And then we have some doctor that wants to run some analytics query over the patient's data. So in particular, we want to run some multi-predicate aggregation query. So we want to compute some aggregation function over records that match different predicates. So here the aggregation function could be sum, count, mean, variance, or standard deviation. And we want to filter based on equality and comparison predicates, and we're going to combine them using and or operators. So for example, maybe we want to compute the number of records where the age is less than 40 and heart rate is greater than 80, for example. And it turns out that this is enough to allow us to train linear models. So if the client uploads values that are in a certain form and we select certain records and then send them together, we can then train a linear model. So for example, we could compute a model where we can predict the heart rate from the number of steps. However, this data is sensitive, so we want to provide strong privacy properties. So we want to protect not only the data contents, but also parts of the query. So in particular, we want to protect these query filter values. So to make this a bit more concrete, we can go back to our original example query. So here we want to hide the values that we're filtering on. So the age, and then the earlier value as well, and we'll have some opaque identifier associated with each feature. We'll still leak some information based on the structure of the query, but you can hide this if you just have some normal form of the query. And we're going to operate in the 3-server setting, honest majority, and provide security against a malicious attacker. So we build our solution on function secret sharing. And a two-party function secret sharing scheme for a function f splits the function into 2 succinct shares, or keys, such that given a key, parties can compute shares of the function f evaluated at x without learning the original function f. So syntax, we have some gen algorithm. We're given the function f. We're going to generate keys k1 and k2. And some eval algorithm, we're given a key k and a point x. We're going to output a share of the function f evaluated at x. And efficient constructions exist for both point functions and comparison functions. So given function secret sharing, it's fairly straightforward to build aggregate queries over public data. And this is very similar to what prior work Splinter does. So we're going to have some data stored at each of the servers. We're going to have identical copies. We're going to start off in the 2-server setting, and we'll later move to the 3-server setting. And so let's say the doctor wants to sum together the costs with patients with age equal to 56, for example. So the doctor is going to start off by generating the keys corresponding to the function that evaluates to 1 at 0.56 and 0 everywhere else. It's going to send key k1 to server 1 and key k2 to server 2. And then for each row in this database, it's going to evaluate the key on the age corresponding to that row. And then it will multiply the evaluation by the corresponding cost. This is going to allow the servers to essentially select out the rows where the age is equal to 56 and then sum together the corresponding costs. So we'll send back shares of the results, and then the doctor can just sum these together to get back the result of its query. So here we're taking advantage of the fact that the server can actually input the values directly into this eval algorithm. It has these age values and can directly input them into and use it to actually compute the result of the query. So the challenge then becomes, how can we support private data? So what happens when the server doesn't actually know these age values that it's filtering on? And so our ideas here are to leverage the structure of the search index. So we'll build a special purpose search index structure. And then we'll also show how this fits well with replicated secret sharing. So for each feature, we're going to construct a special index. And the idea is that each column is going to be a one-hot encoding of the value of that feature. So here, this is going to be a one-hot encoding of age. And here, appends are cheap. So appending to the table just requires adding a new column. And we're going to be targeting applications that query recent data. So we'll just be able to keep a sliding window and be able to throw away old columns in order to keep this table size relatively small. One limitation of this structure is that it's going to constrain the domain of filtered features. However, features that we found in the applications we examined were often already in or mappable to relatively small domains. So for example, 256, and you can use conjunctions for large domains. So you can have a feature for the high order bits and a feature for the low order bits. So now we can show how we can actually leverage the structure of the search index. So we're going to have a copy of this table at each of the servers. And for now, we're just going to assume that we have some way to protect the contents of the table in gray. I'm going to show you how we do that in a second. And so as before, we're going to generate these FSS keys. So for computing the number of records where age is equal to 2. We're going to generate FSS keys for that function, and then send the keys to each of the servers. And now for each row, we're going to evaluate the key on the value corresponding to that row. So we don't have to evaluate the key on any value that's actually dependent on the contents of the data. It's just independent. It's just the row value. Then we'll multiply the evaluation by each of the values in the row and then sum them all together. And we'll do this for each of the rows. So we'll send the result back, which is just going to be shares of the number of records where age is equal to 2. And then we'll output the result of our query. And so the challenge here is, how do we actually hide the contents of this table and make it so that we can actually multiply things together and get the right value back at the client? And our insight is that we can use replicated secret sharing, and that this fits well with function secret sharing, because we're going to have identical copies of the data, and this is well suited to function secret sharing. So we're taking advantage of the fact that with replicated secret sharing, you can essentially get one layer of multiplication for free. So instead of generating just one FSS key, the client is now going to generate 3 pairs of keys. And these are going to correspond to each of the 3 replicated secret shares. So in replicated secret sharing, you have shares 1, 2, and 3 that are going to sum up to the original contents of the database. And we're going to give server 1 shares 1 and 2, server 2 shares 2 and 3, and server 3 shares 3 and 1. And we're going to send the FSS keys to the servers corresponding to the shares of the table that they have. And then we'll evaluate the keys first on share 1 of the table, then on share 2, and then on share 3. And then send the results back to the client. Then the client will sum all these together to get the results of the final query. And so in this way, we're able to actually hide the contents while ensuring that all of these things sum together correctly. And so we get this replication that we need to make things work with function secret sharing while providing strong privacy. And so this is reminiscent of some techniques used in the distributed ORM literature from Bunn et al. And they noticed that these 2 things fit together well in a slightly different setting. So the advantage of this approach is that now there's no communication between the servers in order to select out the records that they need. However, now we need to do a linear scan over O of n times d data, where n is the number of records and d is the domain size. We find that this domain size is fairly small for the applications that we're interested in, but this is still a trade-off. So communication comes at the cost of doing this linear scan. So we have some other contributions in the paper that I don't have time to discuss now, including how you chain together multiple predicates, how you cheaply support malicious security. And we also present some constructions for complex aggregates over time ranges. So we show how to support nonlinear aggregation functions like min, max, and top k. The caveat here is that you could only filter on time and not multiple predicates. So we implement and evaluate our solution. So we run on 3 32-core servers with an 8 gigabit per second connection and 20 millisecond round trip time. And we have 8 predicate queries, and we compare to 2 baselines. So an oblivious multi-dimensional tree, so we implement an R tree and path ORM. And we also compare to a generic MPC baseline, so we use MT speeds configured for the 3-party honest majority setting. So here we're looking at latency from around 1,000 to around 1 million records. And we can see that the gap between us and the MPC baseline and ORM is relatively large when we have around 1,000 records, and that this gap shrinks as the number of records increases. And this we can expect because our latency is growing linearly with the number of records, because we're doing this linear scan over all the records. However, when we consider throughput, we can see that the gap between our solution and ORM is substantially larger. And this is because time series workloads are relatively append heavy, and you're paying the overhead of privacy for not only searches, but also appends when you use an ORM-based solution. And in our solution, appends are relatively cheap. You just add something to a column, and this is very lightweight. So for around 1,000 records, there's a 300x difference, and for around 1 million records, there's a 22x difference in performance. So in conclusion, we show how to use function secret sharing for multi-predicate aggregation queries on private data. And this has applications to training linear models. So some open questions moving forward. So we show how this works for a relatively constrained set of queries. There's an interesting question of how you could actually support a broader set of queries. Also, our search index structures blow up the amount of server storage. There's a question of how we can have more compact encodings. So you have these one-hot encodings. Is it possible to have something that's more compact? Thanks so much, and happy to take any questions.
Are there any questions for Emma? I would like to quickly ask you one. So can you comment very briefly? No, actually, you don't consider actively secure clients, right? So the client is.
Yeah. So we're really in the model where clients are trusted to upload the correct data. So they have, so we're not input checking what the clients are actually submitting to the server, but this is an interesting area for.
Yeah, you
future
didn't check
work.
the keys, for example,
Yeah,
right? The
yeah,
FS keys.
yeah.
Right? Oh, okay, perfect. Thank you. Yep, so let's thank the speaker again, and we move to the final talk. So I'm just gonna use her own laptop, so let's give her some time to set up.
Thank you. I think I'm sharing on Zoom.
That was faster than what I thought. Yep. So the final talk of this session is going to be on private web search with Tiptoe, and Alexandra Hetzinger is going to give the talk. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much for the introduction. So hi everyone, I'm Alexandra, and I'm going to talk to you today about building private web search. And this is joint work with Emma, Henry, and Nikolai, and it's going to appear at SOSP in the fall. Okay, so every day when we browse the web, we make search queries, and these queries often reveal sensitive personal information about us. So for example, this might be information like where we are, what we're doing, and what we care about. And today, the way search works is that when we want to make a query, we send this query over an encrypted channel. Oh, it's not moving. Is my screen not working? Oh, okay, just high latency.
Are you doing back and forth, or is it doing it on itself?
My computer, it looks like it's not moving. Maybe let me try to
Yeah,
stop
can you
sharing.
stop and share again?
Seeing the screen? Okay, and if I go into presenter mode. Okay, so let's try this again. Okay, so yes, our web queries reveal our sensitive data. And today, when we want to make our search query, we send our query over an encrypted channel up to a search engine. And crucially, the search engine here sees our query in the clear. And this is important so that the search engine can actually compute the best web page that answers our query and ship its URL back to us. However, this also means that the search engine here is really amassing a trove of sensitive data about us, and this data is an attractive target for theft in a data breach or for sale to a third party. And so in this work, our goal was to build a search engine, which we call Tiptoe, which never actually learns what the user is searching for. And so in this setting, we're going to have the user send up only the encryption of its search query to the search engine servers. And now the Tiptoe servers are going to perform some cryptographic operations so that they can send back the encryption of the best matching web page for the client's query. So the cryptographers in the room might point out that in theory, this is already a solved problem, right? We can use fully homomorphic encryption to implement the functionality of modern search engines and thereby search over encrypted data. However, in practice, this turns out that it's still very far from feasible because modern search algorithms are really not crypto-friendly. And in particular, they make many query-dependent random accesses to terabytes of information. And so in this work, we take the different approach of instead only relying on lightweight, linearly homomorphic encryption. And this is made possible with the observation that we can actually use modern machine learning techniques to turn messy text search computations into cheap linear ones. So really, we're going to use ML here to pull all of the complexity out of the cryptographic protocol and to build the right data structures that then we can just perform cheap linear operations over. Okay, and so to give you an overview of our work, this work presents Tiptoe, which is a private search engine. The Tiptoe servers learn no information about what the client is searching for, really in a semantic security sense. and the security comes from the learning with errors assumption. Our prototype of TIPTO supports search over text and image data, and we show that our approach is readily extensible to other document types like video or audio. And finally, our evaluation shows that TIPTO can search over a public web crawl, so this is hundreds of millions of web pages, at a cost of only 1/10 of a cent per search query. And in particular, with TIPTO, searches take 2.5 seconds of latency, 15 megabytes of communication, which is the same order of magnitude as fetching a web page, and 1 gigabyte of user storage, which is the same order of magnitude as a large app on our mobile phones. The big caveat here is that TIPTO search quality is nowhere near as good as that of modern search engines like Google, but we show that it's still an improvement over state-of-the-art private search. Okay, so how are we going to do this? Well, TIPTO relies on 3 key design ideas. The first is that we can actually reduce the problem of full text search to just nearest neighbor search. And this is where the machine learning comes in, because we can actually do this with semantic embeddings. Then we can show that we can solve the problem of private nearest neighbor search with a private matrix multiplication. And crucially here, we're going to use clustering techniques to reduce the protocol's communication. And finally, we're going to implement this matrix multiplication using fast linearly homomorphic encryption. And in particular, in this work, we use the preprocessed regev encryption scheme that was given in simple PIR, which is joint work with my co-authors at MIT and at Google. Okay, so let's begin by reducing full text search to nearest neighbor search. So the TIPTO server begins with a public web crawl, so a list of documents, which here I'm showing you as images. And what the server is going to do is it's going to use an embedding function to map each of these documents to some point in an embedding space. And really, you can think of this embedding space here as, for example, just the space of vectors of, say, 256 floating point integers. And the only property that we need the semantic embedding function to satisfy is that documents that are close in a semantic sense, for example, these 2 apples here, are going to map to vectors that are close in the embedding space. And so in particular, vectors that have large inner product scores. And so now what we're going to do is we're going to have the client download the same public embedding function. And the client is similarly going to run its search query, so new problem here, through the embedding function and get a point in the same embedding space. And so now we see that really to find the best web page that matches its search query, the client just needs to find the document whose embedding gives the largest inner product score with the client's query embedding. So really, this is a nearest neighbor search problem. And I want to emphasize that we're really making black box use of the embedding function here. So we're just using off-the-shelf pre-trained models, and any improvements in these models will directly give us improvements in our search quality. Okay, so now we have a nearest neighbor search problem. And we can really naively solve this by just downloading the inner product of the client's query embedding with every document embedding. But this would be super expensive because the web is huge. And so instead, we introduced a second clustering technique to reduce the communication. And so in particular, if we let n here be the number of documents on the web, what we're going to do is we're going to have the TIPTO server ahead of time cluster its n documents into roughly root n clusters, each of size root n. And again, ahead of time, we're going to have our client download a list of the centroids of these clusters. And so now when the client knows that it wants to search for a neat problem, it can first build the embedding of this search query, and then it can just use its locally stored list of cluster centroids to figure out which cluster is actually closest to its search query. And so here, that would be cluster 2. And so now we're going to have the client perform a private search only over cluster 2. This is what's going to let us reduce the communication. However, you might notice that crucially, we still need to hide that the client wants the search over cluster 2. Because for example, cluster 2 here might be the medical conditions cluster, and we really cannot have the server learn this bit of information. So really, we want to privately search over cluster 2, hiding both our query and which cluster we're searching over. And we can do this with a matrix multiplication protocol. And so in particular, the TIPTO server is now going to build a matrix that has n entries. And in the ith column of this matrix, our server is going to store the embeddings for all of the documents in cluster I. And so then at query time, our client knows that it wants to search cluster 2. And so what it can do is it can just build the vector that consists of all zeros, except with its query embedding at position 2. And then our client can encrypt this with a linearly homomorphic encryption scheme and send it up to the server. And now our server can compute the matrix vector product between its local plaintext matrix and the client's query vector and send the answer back to the client. And when we do this, we see that this matrix multiplication here is really selecting out the second column of the matrix. So this is the column corresponding to cluster 2. And for each entry there, it's computing the inner product between the document embedding and the client's query embedding. So really, the client here is getting back the encrypted relevance scores for every document in cluster 2. And so our client can decrypt, find the biggest one, here that's document 3, and conclude that its best matching document is document 3 in cluster 2. And just, I wanted to mention here that the homomorphic encryption scheme that we use is actually one that supports pre-processing. And so what's going to happen is that ahead of time, our client is going to download some pre-processed data structure about the server's matrix, and this is just going to be used to speed up the cryptographic operations. Great. So that's at a high level how search and ranking works in TIPTO. So we implemented TIPTO and open sourced our code, and then we ran it over a public web crawl of 360 million English web pages. So to do so, we had to perform lots of pre-processing to do this embedding, clustering, and then cryptographic pre-processing steps. And then to make search queries, we run TIPTO over a cluster of roughly 45 commodity machines. So first, we evaluated TIPTO search cost. And here I'm comparing to COAS, which is the prior state-of-the-art private search system, which was designed for private search over Wikipedia. So since TIPTO runs over an entire crawl of the web, this is roughly 70 times more documents. And we see that TIPTO also achieves roughly 3 times less communication, roughly 200 times less server computation, and overall this gives an AWS cost per query that's roughly 60 times smaller. One downside here is that the TIPTO client has to perform roughly 30 core seconds of work, but much of this work can actually happen ahead of time before the client knows what it wants to query. And our client also has this relatively large 1 gigabyte of storage, which corresponds exactly to the semantic embedding function, the list of cluster centroids, and then the cryptographic hints that we just saw. We also evaluated TIPTO's search quality, and so here we're evaluating on the standard MS Marco benchmark, which consists of a set of documents and then query and best document pairs. And so what this mean reciprocal rank score here is telling you is that the best non-private neural search algorithms, which is Colbert here, ends up ranking the best result at position 2 out of 100 on average, whereas TIPTO, which is private, ranks the best result at position 10 out of 100 on average. And this is comparable to the classical term frequency inverse document frequency algorithm. And finally, I wanted to give you just a taste of TIPTO's search results. So these are TIPTO search results on some text search queries, again, over this public web crawl. And the key takeaway here is that TIPTO actually performs reasonably well on conceptual queries. The main limitation is that TIPTO cannot handle exact string search as well. And so queries that contain rare strings like names, phone numbers, or addresses are less likely to return relevant results. And so as a reward for making it this far through the talk, I actually wanted to show you a demo of search with TIPTO. So, okay, perfect. You're still seeing my screen. Great. So what I have here is the TIPTO client, and it has already downloaded the required hints and other information from the server. And so what I can do is I can enter a private web search query. So for example, we can search for something like restaurants in Santa Barbara. And so this is going to execute this TIPTO search protocol that we just saw, and it's going to return a list of like the top 10 URLs, which we can see indeed contain restaurants in Santa Barbara. So does anyone in the audience have anything they would really like to privately search for? I know it's maybe not the most private of settings, but you know. Okay, no takers. Okay, so maybe we can also try this on the query from the talk. So knee problem. And again, it's going to run through these steps that we saw and again, return some search results that, you know, are relevant to our search query. So let me just get back to my slides. Okay. Great. Yeah. So this talk presented Tipto, which is a private web search engine. The open questions are whether we can further improve Tipto's search costs by improving the efficiency of the underlying search protocol, and also whether we can further improve Tipto's search quality by using more complex neural ranking schemes. So yeah, thank you so much for your attention, and I'm happy to take any questions.
You have any questions for Alexandra?
Just a couple of questions, but I'll only ask like two of them, and we can discuss the others offline. So are your clusters the same size?
Yeah, roughly the same size. So we run like off-the-shelf clustering techniques like k-means, and so these don't always produce balanced clusters, but we'll roughly balance them so that roughly all columns of our matrix have the same size.
Okay, so basically, like you pad all of them to the same size when you do like PR queries.
Yeah. So all of the upload and the download are fixed length strings, so there's no like message length based side channels because it's all encrypted fixed length strings. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm not very familiar with the clustering algorithm, but is the whole searching algorithm data independent? Because if it's data independent, then like the server can infer information like from how long runs the algorithm, right?
Yeah, so our server here never actually decrypts what the client is searching for, right? So the client encrypts its query with its own secret key, and the server just operates over the encrypted data. So really, the server can't learn anything about what the client is searching for, and also it's like runtime or other like computation depending stuff can't depend in any way on what the client is searching for. So it really hides like, in a cryptographic sense.
So basically, you only run one round trip between the client and the server, and that's all.
Yeah, so what I described here for ranking runs in one round trip, and then we actually use a second PIR step to just fetch the URL of the top ranking document. So yeah, what I showed you here, the client figures out that it wants like document 3 in cluster 2, and then it'll do a PIR query to fetch the URL of this.
Okay, got it. Yeah. Thanks.
Question?
You mentioned that the PR requires some pre-processing.
Yeah.
So I just want to ask, is that friendly to dynamic database?
Oh, yeah. That's a great question. Yeah. So as you correctly pointed out, the web is constantly changing. And we do have some state on the client here that depends on the contents of what we're searching over. So this could be extended to support dynamic databases with some incremental indexing techniques where you, for example, only update parts of the hint for the parts of the database that have changed. And I think, yeah, we have some ongoing work to try and figure out if there's any better ways to do this. But yeah, this is a fantastic point.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks so much.
Okay. So with that, let's thank the speaker again and all the speakers of the session. Thank you so much, Alexandra. So it was a great set of talks. Now it's time for lunch, and we'll come back here again at 2:10. Thank you.
Thank you so much for letting me do the demo. I really appreciate it. I know it's tricky to set up in special cases. Oh, thank you. Yeah, thank you. Yeah. Yeah. So there's some. So what we use is simple PIR, and there's some like techniques in that paper to show how it's only part of the database changes. You can update only part of the hint. The server knows the database, so the database is public. Yeah. But we're thinking about whether there are better things to do. Maybe different. I was so nervous. I was